Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're joining from today.
I'm joining from Lisarow on the lands of the Darkinjung people.
And I am joining from the lands of the Nyungbul people of the Bundjalung Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We acknowledge their deep and ongoing connection to land, waters, language and culture, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Okay, we're really excited. Our guest today, Erin Mealor, is a 35 co-pilot and supervisory pilot at Auriga Group. She is based in Karratha and she conducts, which is an acronym I've learnt just now, is Helicopter Marine Pilot Transfers, HMPTs, and serves as an ATO AS350 ship-to-shore supervisory pilot, training new line pilots and cadets. Erin's career has taken her from ground crew and marketing assistant in Sydney to managing Newcastle and Hunter Valley flying operations to flying everything from scenic charters to emergency flood relief. Along the way, she's seen firsthand how technology from navigation systems to training simulators is reshaping aviation and how AI could play a role in the industry's future. Welcome, Erin. Very, very exciting to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What an intro.
It's a mouthful. I feel like that's my hardest intro I've done so far.
I'm sorry.
We always start off with your journey. You know, your aviation story starts on the grounds in Sydney as part of the Heli Experiences team. So what first drew you to helicopters? And I guess, can you tell us a little bit about how you've got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, I didn't actually know that my passion lied with helicopters until I pursued aviation sort of as a broader topic, which was my original sort of passion, I suppose. But my grandfather was a rear gunner in World War II. So he would fly in the Halifax and the Lancasters. And so there was this thread of aviation that went through my family, I guess, from then.
What is a rear gunner?
So they sit in the back of the plane and shoot things. But yeah, he survived the whole war, which was pretty rare for his position. They were normally pretty vulnerable. And when he got back, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. So there's a lot of pride in our family about what he did in the RAAF. And so, yeah, that thread just sort of went through our family. Growing up, we'd hear stories about my granddad, and I would see his flying goggles hanging on the wall. My dad received those. And so, yeah, it was something that I guess innately I just was drawn towards aviation, and from a very young age was always just looking up into the sky anytime I heard something or saw something. I guess aviation was sort of my initial passion just broadly, and so I pursued fixed wing flying when I was about 15. I went for my first flight, and my first job out of high school was on Sunshine Coast Airport, working in a small little maintenance facility, and it just sort of grew from there. When I was 21, I told my best friend at the time, I've never been in a helicopter, but I've been in a plane and I really want to try a helicopter because I feel like really drawn to helicopters all of a sudden. And so her and all my housemates pitched in to buy me a scenic ride for my birthday. And that's really where, that's really where it began, because I was silent, like throughout the whole flight. It was only 20 minutes, but I was just dead silent. I was just taking it all in and was in awe about what we were doing and how they flew through the air. It was crazy to me. So after that, I ended up reaching out to that same company that I went on the scenic flight with and asked, like, do you need a hand? I'll sweep the floor. I'll work for free. Like, I just want to be around it. And they ended up, it just was sort of perfect timing. They were looking for a ground crew and they gave me a trial and put me on after that. So I ground crewed for Heli Experiences in Sydney for 18 months. Basically just, loading passengers, giving safety briefings, doing the marketing, sort of assisting the COO with any extra marketing material that he needed, events planning. And then they said to me, if you get your helicopter license, we'll give you your first job. At the time, getting your first job is very hard in this industry. Similar with fixed wing, but I think particularly with helicopters, it's a lot harder to get a paid job when you're fresh out of your license, you're just seen as like an L-plater, essentially. You're a bit of a liability. You still need a lot of training, and you come out with the foundational skills, but then obviously no experience. So you have to go and get that somewhere. And getting that first job is really tough. So a lot of people end up going remote, working without pay or in exchange for other services that normally aren't monetary, like warmth and food, and then maybe you'll help in the yard or ride horses or something like that. So when they said to me, we'll give you your first job, I was like, this is an opportunity. If I'm going to do it, I have to do it now. And I was just, again, fortunate with the timing that there was the offer for a fee help program. So similar to HEX, when you get a degree, they offered that for your helicopter license. And it was brand new at the time in 2017.
So essentially delayed payment.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
You can. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it works exactly as the HEX debt works. It just comes out of your pay once you have a certain earning and grows over time instead of decreases. But yeah, so that opportunity came up and I took it. I did my helicopter license on the Sunshine Coast in 2017. When I went back to my first job and said, "Hey, I have my license now," they were like, "We're not really looking for someone at the moment." And I was like, "Oh goodness!" So I went back to ground crewing for just shy of a month, and timing, and it's just timing all the time. I happened to bump into this couple from Rockhampton who came in for a scenic flight, and we got talking and they found out I'd just finished my license. I was looking for a job. They said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I'll do anything. Like, I will go mustering, I will fly scenic tours, I will do anything and everything. I'll ferry a machine across the country if I need to." And they said to me, "Can you ride a horse?" And I said, "Yeah, I can ride a horse." They're like, "Okay, well, do you want to come stay with us?" Because the man was a helicopter pilot, a mustering pilot, and they lived on a property with horses that they needed exercising every day, and they could never get enough people to ride the horses with them. So I went up and stayed with them for a month in Rockhampton. I flew with Cam in the day and then rode horses with him in the afternoon. And after that, my first job, the boss called me and was like, "All right, we'll put you on." So
Could you ride a horse?
here's the funny thing. I had horse riding lessons when I was about 10. And in my delusion, I was like, "Yeah, I can ride a horse." And then when it came to putting the saddle on again for the first time after well over a decade, I could not remember at all how to do anything. So I ended up scooping horse poo a lot more than I ended up riding horses. Essentially, as long as they got exercise and they got, put in the yard every day, that was really what was important to them.
And so following that time, you then got your first job.
Right. Yeah. So that's where I guess started developing foundational skills for my career. Got my first 500 hours, which is sort of the big milestone. You become a lot more employable once you have 500 hours. And then
And is that flying 500 hours flying with someone else with you? Is it like your L plates?
No. So this is solo. So generally once you come out of your commercial helicopter license, you graduate with about 105 hours, and about 60% of that is dual time. The other time is solo. But once you have your license, your tick in the book, you are qualified to fly on your own without anybody next to you. Yeah.
Gosh.
So yeah,
That's terrifying.
It's scary when you think about it. But that's why generally when you get your first sort of tourism job, you have 500 hours. That's generally an insurance minimum that most operators don't negotiate on. So I was quite lucky to get hired with them when I was about 2-ish hours and developed my foundational flying skills there with them.
And can you go back to the feeling of when you got into that helicopter just for that scenic flight with your friends? Like, what made you excited to be around it all? Or apart from your history with your family, can you describe that a bit? Like, what made it so exciting?
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. It's kind of a matter of when you know, I think, because I was always drawn to aviation and I'd flown in planes. I'd flown them with instructors before, and there was always something that just didn't click. And I still wanted to be around it all the time and was always inspired when I was on an airport, but I just didn't get that feeling of this is where I'm supposed to be. And then the moment the helicopter just lifted into a hover and turned around itself, I was like, what is this? And it was just, it clicked. It just made sense. And then the feeling of taking off is unlike anything else. It's like, I mean, if you've been in a helicopter, it's kind of like a roller coaster, essentially. It's just, how is this thing moving up and forward and around at the same time? And then just being drawn to the versatility of what they could do was way more exciting to me than sort of, regular transport A to B. I just saw a much more exciting future with the helicopter.
Especially in mustering and,
Yeah.
jobs like that. Yeah,
Erin,
wild.
we've spoken so much with women on this podcast about imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
There is clearly a lot more at stake
Mm.
in this scenario. When you were first piloting your helicopter solo, was there feelings of self-doubt? And if so, like, what did you do in that moment?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because you come across
absolutely.
quite confident.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think everyone doubts themselves the first time they go on their solo, because this is the very first time where the only person that can put it on the ground is you.
Oh,
And that's the hardest
gosh.
part, is putting it back on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very daunting. But I mean, I think, yeah, trying anything for the first time is exceptionally daunting. I think the imposter syndrome developed for me a little bit later when I was given more responsibility on top of flying. I think when you're sort of seen as someone that can represent the company or can train other people, all of a sudden that's when the real imposter syndrome is like, oh, no, I'm not qualified for that. But
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, the feeling of putting the helicopter on the ground for the first time is very, very scary.
Yeah, I bet. From those early days when you first became a line pilot and then later base manager in Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, can you tell us about your use of technology and how that
Yeah.
shifted?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because every helicopter that you fly is different, not just in what systems it uses, but also it has its own personality, essentially. Learning the systems on board your helicopter is extremely important. It's kind of a running joke as well in the industry that helicopter pilots don't ever learn to use their systems properly. And fixed wing pilots are always like, don't you know how to use that? Because a lot of the time, our work is looking outward, just looking out the window. It's not inward facing, whereas a lot more, fixed wing pilots develop that skill a lot sooner. So that's kind of a running joke. But essentially, the use of technology in tourism was mostly around booking systems and back end website code writing and things like that. In terms of the flying, it didn't change too much. It was just learning different systems on board the helicopters that you were trained on. I think the real step up into technology is what I'm doing now, flying quite advanced helicopters, which is a whole new world to me, a whole new world.
How so?
Can you tell us about that?
So, I mean, I fly a helicopter that has a 4-axis autopilot now, whereas prior to that, I had never used an autopilot and I'd never flown a helicopter with an autopilot system. So you go from what is sort of the bricks and mortar hand flying skills, which is your pride and joy in that particular sector of the industry. Your hands and feet are your whole life, really. To now you're flying a system now that obviously is built on the foundations and principles of helicopter aerodynamics, but your hands and feet aren't as important as your use and knowledge of the system that is flying the helicopter, because it's built in with stabilization systems, and the autopilot system can fly that helicopter better than you, with more precision than you, probably safer than you. So you have to learn how to operate it so that it flies the helicopter instead of it all just being you flying the helicopter. So I almost consider myself a controller of a system now, more so than a helicopter pilot. If that makes sense.
So it's gone from something that's quite almost practical to theoretical in a way. And I mean, is that kind of, to me, and I think there's a lot of fear around this, right? That's more terrifying, don't you think?
Because there's a loss of
Because
control.
you've got a loss of control. I mean, you don't have a loss of control, but you do have a loss of control because your hands and feet are yours and you're fully in control of them. Whereas a system, you're in control of, but you're not fully in control of it.
Yeah.
So is there a fear around that?
I mean, the fear is more so of the unknown and not necessarily of the system itself, because when you learn the system, you do realize that it is potentially a better pilot than you are, as long as you operate it correctly and responsibly. But there's always that override that is there for you to use your hands and feet when you need them. The only trouble is, I guess, because your hand and feet skills do deteriorate over time when they're not being used. You don't want to have to rely on a system that can fatigue over time when you have systems that are designed to keep you safe and keep you from having to interfere. And yeah, the way the technology is going, it's purely safety. Like when you think about it, aviation's foundation is around safety because it is very risk inherent every day. You turn up to your job, you think about the worst day, the worst thing that could happen to you at your job, you'll still go home. Whereas in aviation, there's a risk that you don't, and you take others with you. So everything is safety focused, especially more so now in this modern world. And so, yeah, the systems essentially make the helicopter safer than you when you learn to use them responsibly.
And so I just finished reading this book called Adaptation, which is about kind of this, other sense that we should have, the other kind of IQ that we should have. And it's specifically, she created this theory around pilots because they are always looking at the worst case scenario of something, and everything. You guys are great apparently in corporate and everything because you look at worst case scenarios all the time. Every time you get into a plane, you're trained to assume that it's going to go down and you're going to have to come up with some solutions very quickly to be able to land something safely. How's that going to change with this kind of technology? And are people training for worst case scenarios with this technology? And is that part of the brain for a pilot going, as you said, going to become a bit more docile because you're not practicing? And is that a fear or an issue, do you think?
That's a really interesting question because we are definitely trained in worst case scenario. All of our, operating checks and recency checks are all based around emergency scenarios primarily. But I've even seen some developmental AI tools that they're using and hoping to integrate into aircraft systems in the future, which is all around fault detection. And it's fascinating because when you think about how fast a computer can find an issue, find a trend, do quick math, it actually takes a lot of human error out of it. And part of our studies when we get our commercial license is a subject called human factors. And it's basically training you to understand how we as humans make errors, how we can be deceived by our surroundings sometimes and our experiences, how we can assume something is happening that isn't happening because physiologically we might be receiving different information. And I think at the time when I did my license, the statistics were like 78% of incidents and accidents in the aviation industry were due to human error. So if you can develop technology and the use of AI to remove these elements where human error is at its greatest, I think it's making the industry astronomically safer and giving pilots peace of mind that I don't have to sit here and flip out a piece of paper and try to remember a formula that I rarely use to calculate if I can get from A to B safely or if I can achieve this landing with this weight on board. If you have a tool on board that you can just input and it compute right away, I think that makes our jobs way easier, way safer, and it actually gives us more brain power to focus on the other areas of flying that might require our hands and feet, might require a little bit more concentration. And I think that's huge. If you can reduce a pilot's workload, especially in like a stressful environment or a scenario where something's not going to plan, that makes me excited and that makes me see my future in aviation with a lot more longevity.
I think you put it in perspective really well just then, because it's like, it's not just the difference between driving a manual and a automatic, it's complex, and it's the fact that you're having to do mathematical formulas and that's one tiny problem solve. It's like mind blowing. So yeah, it's like this is actually allowing you to, to really, I guess, be present and dealing with a whole lot more than, it's not just about driving a vehicle.
Is there a time when it's been the other way around where tech said one thing and you're glad that you had, your human capabilities and you trusted yourself and your own instincts?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, at the moment, especially in what I do, so with helicopter marine pilot transfer, we land on ships that are moving on the water. And there can be a little bit of erroneous feedback that you receive because the water is maybe somewhere between 50 and 100 feet lower than where the vessel that you're landing on is. So you're receiving data about your height above the surface beneath you that is changing constantly. Yeah, and it's also affected by an unstable condition such as water, which is moving up and down, and if swell's high. Also, your wind vectors change. The ships make their own wind, and it's different to the wind that's in the air around you, which can affect your landing decisions. So in some ways, it provides situational awareness, but it doesn't provide the ultimate decision. And I guess in those instances, yes, you're purely relying on what you know and what you've been trained to do as a pilot and using your technology just to help make an informed decision. It's not perfect. So in what we do, yes, every day actually we're watching wind, but we're also using what we know about the environment we're operating in to help us make the best decision for our landing.
So now you're training cadets. How has it changed from when you were doing your training? I guess how's the day-to-day in the training changed? And are there new digital tools or simulators that you're using to train these cadets that, are new and different to the way you learn? And do you think it's better?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I guess we do have a lot more tools. There's a lot more apps that are being developed for pilots now that you can learn. I mean, you can learn the whole ins and outs of a GPS system on an app, which is crazy. You can put in a flight plan. It can even simulate it flying so that you can use the tools as if you were on the flight. I mean, there are...
Is there something on Roblox we could try?
I'm not.
I bet my son's got it. Just kidding.
All I know is Skibidi Toilet. That's Roblox, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
We're really not supposed to say that. We're not cool enough to say that.
You are not. I mean, you're cooler than me, but if I ever tried that, it took me a long time to actually work out that that's where it was coming from because I didn't realize. And then now I'm like, oh, okay, it's Roblox. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Sorry, I fully interrupted your train of thought.
No, I mean, it's hard as well because I'm actually not an instructor. So the role that I was given was a supervisory pilot. And it's interesting, and I'm sure you guys have come across this in your careers as well, is that there are people who may be given instructional roles and have instructional qualifications. And then there are people who are teachers, and they're not always the same. Some people are instructors but can't teach. And then there are some people who maybe can teach but don't have the formal qualification. So essentially, that is what my role was. The supervisory pilot was somebody that I think they trusted enough to be able to teach without, a formal qualification. So I tried my best to teach in a way that makes things as simple as possible for people to understand. And then once they have the foundations, that's when you can introduce tools that, here's a little trick I learned, but I guess the tools come after the foundation because you don't want people, again, and this is just how our industry sort of works, is that you don't want people to have their only skill be technology, but you also don't want their only data senses to be purely their own feelings and their own vision and without relying, because technology in some instances can do things better than us. So, yeah. I definitely train. There's a little tool we use called Notebook LM because there's so much regulation in our industry. It's not just about flying well. It's also about following the rules and knowing what's right and wrong, what you can and can't do. And that varies in every operation, in every airspace. And so Notebook LM has been a huge tool for us. Basically, you just dump in all the regs, all the rules, all these documents that you can find, even our company SOPs and things like that. And you can just ask it, what are the rules about carrying a life jacket? And it's a use of AI, and it just pumps out the answer for you. It gives you all the references. And I think that's been a big thing that I've used to help with the training that I've conducted of, don't just fly well, know the rules, know the regulations, because that's only going to help you for the rest of your career as well. And that's a little trick that someone who was training me gave to me. So I've passed that down as well.
I mean, it sounds, that's like that it feels like, in a broader sense, that rule applies across the board for
Mm.
any occupation or any field, because, and that's what we've been hearing from people. It's like AI is a great tool, but you need to learn the fundamentals. You need to be an expert in that place to be able to cue and ask the right questions.
Mm.
If I stepped into aviation and tried to use Notebook LM, I'm probably not going to get accurate responses. But so that's definitely a thread we're finding.
Have you seen a change in the types of cadets that apply now in terms of the shift from people applying because they did like that more practical approach compared to, I don't know, a lot of kids that are now playing aviation games that are applying because of that more technology skewed outlook?
Yeah, it's so interesting as well because I am a millennial, and the difference between the millennial generation and the Gen Z generation is like, I don't know how it's such a big gap, but one of the cadets that I've trained is Gen Z, and such a different experience to a millennial cadet, like night and day. And,
What are some of the notable differences?
well, I think a lot of it is attitude. I think millennials sort of, because we grew up with the change of technology. So we got mobile phones when we were in high school, and whereas Gen Z have had the, iPad and iPhone use since pretty much day dot. So, and I feel like the difference is that millennials typically, and this is a generalization, of course, but they typically are willing to battle and struggle to get to an answer. And I feel like Gen Zs expect that the result is just,
There.
yeah, it'll just come to them. It will be there. And I don't mean to put down Gen Z at all, but it's almost like this expectation that everything works out and that it's not primarily on their personal development. It's more so on the use of whatever tools they have that will help them achieve that.
So how do you navigate that with something that's so crucial to having that base knowledge
I mean,
in
well,
teaching?
I mean,
Yeah.
encouraging them to use the tool like Notebook LM essentially is something that helps people that aren't willing to sit down in front of a paper book, because they can quick search and then they can sort of learn through that avenue. And at the same time, it sounds horrible, but you almost in a way have to like sort of find a point where you can break that sense that everything will be okay, because they are in a very safety critical role, and they do have to meet a certain standard and maintain a certain standard and hold themselves to that in order to maintain safety. So it can be tricky. It's about personalities as well. But at the end of the day, I think exposure, throwing them out into a scenario where they can't use technology and have to rely on themselves, definitely helps.
Do you get a lot of pushback with the Gen Zs on that exercise?
No, I mean, in the experience with the people that I've worked with, I've been met with great enthusiasm, but it's probably been the ignorance is bliss type of enthusiasm. After a few times they've been exposed to things, then they sort of cotton on to like, oh, I don't know if I want to sign up for this.
That's hilarious. I don't know how my kids would cope, given, I mean, we're obviously trying to keep them off devices to a point, but they're just that's their resource. That's what they know.
True.
And it's like, I mean, I think about travel now. Like, imagine traveling without your iPhone the way that we did. Well, I did, but we had to use Lonely Planet Guide when I traveled.
Get
And
off
it's
a
like,
bus and be
yeah,
like, oh,
you just would never
Look up
do
the
that now.
timetable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's such a different space.
and can I ask, are you seeing a shift? Obviously, it's a very male-oriented industry as well. Have you seen a shift as well from when you first started to now? Are there more women playing for these kinds of roles?
Yeah, look, I think the statistics when I last looked them up was that 8% of helicopter pilots were female. Interestingly, I'm one of three in my company, which still is rare, but to have more than one in one company is pretty impressive. I'm very inspired because the other two that I work with are both mothers as well, which is another thing, because even though we are seeing more women come into the industry, we're not seeing a lot of longevity in the industry. They get to a point where they maybe start a family or other circumstances in their personal life change, and then they don't have the support, whatever that looks like in their life, to continue in the industry. So that's been super inspirational to see. But I think having more women in the business side of aviation helps as well. And I do believe that for a time there may need to be what is a perceived inequality, in a sense that they have to focus on women if they want more women. And that might seem to other people as an inequality because they're only taking women. But to make things equal, that there needs to be a shift and a focus. The airlines were doing that. They were only taking female intakes for a while. And then you do get a lot of pushback from people being like, oh, why can't just the right person for the job get it, you know? And this is where I do believe that there has to be a push and a focus. And I'm very grateful that we have a contract. The company that I work for has a contract with a big mining company, Rio Tinto, and they impose KPIs onto their contractors. And they also have one on female pilots for us, which
That's
is
great.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see that because though it might look from the outside as a bit of favoritism or inequality, it is focusing on promoting this so that it's not just driven to men and it's not just driven to a particular type of men as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I've got two questions relating to this.
Oh.
And the first one is, what do you think female pilots bring to aviation, especially helicopters? And the second one is, what is the pathway for girls or young women who are interested? Is it through the army? Is it, yeah. So firstly, what do women bring? And not just as pilots, but in aviation in general.
I love this question. So traditionally, I think what happened was when women started almost forcing their ways into aviation, generally it seems like men who were supportive of women, they didn't maybe think through why they supported women. So whenever they were in a conversation with someone who didn't support women, they found a way to defend them. And what they would say is, oh, but girls are good on gear, you know, they're not tough on the gear like the boys are. And it was almost like you would only hire a woman now because she won't break your helicopter, essentially. And
she's a dainty driver.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
Right.
What does that mean?
But it was, even though it's like, it is what it is, but it was progress. And even though it wasn't perfect, it was moving in the right direction. It was a man in a male-dominated setting speaking up for a woman. And it might not have been perfect, but it was the start of what has now developed into people hiring people because they like their attitude, they like the balance that they bring to the workforce, they like how they interact with other people. And I think that is something that when you have men and women working together, you do have a lot more balance. You have a lot more just, I think, general respect for one another. And yeah, it's just this kind of like, not a peer pressure in a way, but because you're surrounded by people who are keeping the balance, prevents anyone from skewing too far into any kind of behavior that's unacceptable, because there's a lot more I guess balance. Yeah, accountability. Yeah. And in my workforce, all three of us women that I currently work with in my base, we're all from different backgrounds. And yeah, I think we just come with a good attitude, really, and without an ego. And I think in this industry, if you're going to be safe and if you're going to be successful, you can't have an ego. You have to be able to take direction, but you also have to be confident and assertive when you need to be. And if you are either a man or a woman, but, you know, we're speaking about women, if you are a woman that can do that and finds yourself in settings where you don't get intimidated by being surrounded by men, you'll thrive like anywhere else, you know. And if you want to get into the industry as a woman, there's so many pathways in now and there's so much more choice. Like, you don't have to just follow one path and that's your only way into flying. So if you wanted to go through the military, there's pros and cons, but I think first and foremost, you have to be drawn to the military life. You have to be drawn to rigorous training, to that kind of routine, and you will come out as a very developed pilot with a lot of skills, with a lot of endorsements that will set you up for a multi-engine career in the civilian world if that's where you see yourself in the future. But then if you're getting called by that kind of wild side that wants to be in the bush, that wants to work on fires, that wants to sling long lines around, or if you are interested in flying around wineries and sitting at restaurants for lunch while, people sip wine and then they go down the tourism route. But I think you got to know at least where you want to, so what direction you want to head in before you get started. And if you see yourself in the military, you see yourself drawn to that kind of environment
Structure.
and that excites you, then pursue that 100%. But if you see yourself in the bush or if you see yourself in tourism, I definitely go the civilian route, which is now through a fee help program if you don't have the financial means to do it yourself. And yeah, there's so much work in tourism. It's maybe just a bit more of a struggle and a bit more, you just have to have a bit of grit about you to sort of get your first couple jobs and push
Bit of a
yourself forward.
hustle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like any other job. Yeah.
100%.
I definitely think I'd be that ladder pilot if I went into it.
Yeah.
You briefly touched on your flood relief work. I'd love to hear more about your kind of your work outside of your day-to-day job, one. And two, if technology plays a role in those types of jobs as well.
So the flood relief, I guess, we only got to do whenever there were floods.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the aerial incendiary. Now that definitely uses technology a lot more than the flood relief because that's a bit more of just the general flying. But the incendiary is lighting fires. And this is super fascinating. And I still don't have a lot of exposure in the fire environment. But basically, we used what we call dragon eggs and these little eggs that get injected with
Such a good name.
flammable liquid. Yeah. And then you drop them down a chute under the helicopter as you're flying around. And, they hit the ground and after about 2 minutes or so, they light up and then they light the ground
Wow.
on fire. And this little contraption was super impressive, but also kind of rudimentary in a way because it can block up and then all of a sudden you've got smoke in the cabin, which happened a couple of times. We were
Oh my
kind of
God.
inadvertently just clearing the blockage a few times, but that's just what it is. But yeah, the fire scanning that the RFS use and just the iPads, like the apps that they were using on their iPads, they're flying around in the helicopter with us, directing us to the hotter zones and the cooler zones and up the hill and
Wow.
down the hill. And we're obviously using the information that we're receiving about wind to light in a certain direction so that we're not flying back and forth into the smoke.
I guess with the huge advancements in drones and what they can do, how does this coexist within your space? I mean, are you using drones as part of what you do? AI is obviously threatening traditional jobs. Is it something that you are also trained in and
So
are using?
I personally don't use drones, don't have a drone license. I think they have been a game changer when it comes to aerial photography and aerial scanning and mapping.
Yeah.
We are seeing more and more technology advance in the direction of unpiloted helicopters, which is fascinating. I think if you think about it, if you were flying on an airline and you knew that there was no person sitting in the cockpit, would you want to fly on that plane?
Oh,
No.
Definitely not.
Exactly. And I feel like that sentiment of there will always be that job where you want a person, you want a face sitting in a cockpit. And yeah, particularly with what we do, I think they'll always want a person at the controls. But when it comes to things that aren't life critical, where you're not moving people around, like we just touched on, those jobs are definitely going to disappear from helicopter. And not to mention they're a lot cheaper as well. So there's that aspect to
Yeah.
it.
oh,
I used
100%.
to work in news and current affairs and used to go up in the helicopter with the cameraman
Oh,
and things.
awesome.
But now it's, you can get a Mavic too and just throw a camera up and
Yeah,
it's super
traffic
easy
reporting.
and traffic
Exactly.
reporting. It's makes it more affordable for people as well in that sense. Yeah. Yeah. We could speak to you like most of our guests forever. So I feel like we should probably wrap it up. But thank you so much for coming on because I just think you've added so many incredible insights into an industry that we probably didn't understand much about. So thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank
Erin.
you.
It was really, really interesting. And yes, we're such novices in this area, but I think it's, like you said, there's a need for more women in aviation, and it doesn't need to be one type of woman, but they certainly, so I guess if you could sum up the type of woman to go into aviation in 3 words, what would those be?
Well, I mean, you have to have a passion for it. So, yeah, passionate, teachable, and I think persistent. You will encounter days, weeks, sometimes months in this industry where you just think, what have I done? Like, why am I here? I would just want to be on a beach somewhere sipping a pina colada. I don't want to be dealing with this. But no, I think, yeah, you have to have a passion. You don't have to be a mechanical person. You don't have to be a science and technology girly. You can be a girl that loves to have her hair nice, have her nails done. You can do all that and fly helicopters. There's not an archetype, but you have to have a good attitude. You will always be learning constantly, and you might be teaching others sometimes what you've learned, but you will always be being taught as well. And you have to enjoy that, I think, constant learning. And then, yeah, persistent, because you will face days and times and even people that will make you question why you're there. So yeah, you have to have some grit and not just give up when you have a bad day or something gets hard.
Love it. Thank you.
And
Thanks
thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of Femmebot, the podcast powering women in tech. If you liked what you heard, hit subscribe and share.